This is Voice of the Bus, Mark Johnson, and you're listening to the Folsom Frenzy Podcast.
Welcome to the Folsom Frenzy Podcast. My name is Jake. I'm here with the usual crew, Chase, Sreyas, and Topher, and we have a very special guest joining us. Mark Johnson, voice of the Buffs, has joined us. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it's good to be on with you guys. You know, you first contacted me here about, 2 months ago, I guess. And I had little problems that we couldn't make it work out, but I'm glad it finally did. And you know what? It's even better now because we're talking about a 4-1 football team. So we got some good stuff to talk about.
Absolutely. That's definitely true. And we're glad that you're doing better. You know, Buffs Nation absolutely needs its voice. Totally healthy.
Well, there was questions about that. I'll tell you guys a great little background story. So for your viewers and listeners that didn't know, I do a lot of cowboy stuff, and I was team roping and had an accident and broke my pelvis, which is pretty serious stuff. By the way, I don't recommend anybody doing that, by the way. Okay. Just exceptionally painful and very debilitating for a long period of time. I had surgery. I get home and I get a call from the broadcast entity saying, holy cow, what are we going to do here? Who do you want to get to fill in? How's this going to work? And I said, no, I'll be fine. I'll be there. And they're like, oh yeah, because this was on August 5th or 6th, I guess. And our first game was the 29th. And I said, oh, no, there's no problem. I'll be fine. Well, at the time, I'm laying in bed. I can't move. I'm being bolted back together. I hang the phone up and I look at my wife and I said, holy crap, I hope I can make it on the 29th, because I was lying at the feet. And I did that first game against North Dakota State. And a reporter asked me afterward, how did it go? And I said, I only cried during the commercial breaks. So we made it through the broadcast. We're doing fine.
Hey, we were crying at halftime too, Mark. That was a scary game. That's a really good team.
Yeah. Oh, without question. You know, that's my home country. I grew up in North Dakota. So I knew what North Dakota State was all about. I grew up watching. I graduated. I played college basketball at Minot State. And then after back surgery in my career, I graduated from the University of North Dakota. And so NDSU was a rival of ours. And I knew what that program was all about. And I knew it was going to be a very difficult game. And it was a good test for us right out of the blocks. And, I think kind of set the groundwork for what we're seeing right now.
Absolutely. And kind of going with that, we'd love for you to tell your story to Buff Nation. I think we've heard bits and pieces of it, right, in the past, and it would be great to just hear the full story. How did the voice of the Buffs get to become the voice of the Buffs? What was your origin story? We'd love to hear it.
Well, yeah, growing up in North Dakota, I came from a little town. I was born in a little town called Hillsboro, in between Grand Forks and Fargo, North Dakota. I grew up much of my childhood in Grand Forks. And I always figured I'd be either a pastor or a sportscaster. And so I got into sportscasting. And I figured the pay was better at that time. And so I just started working on, being a lot like you guys. You guys love sports, right? I mean, you love the Buffs, you love sports. That's the way I grew up as well. And I was always figured I'd do something speaking. I was always a guy that enjoyed, getting up and talking in front of class and giving speeches and that kind of thing. And so I thought, well, what better way? Once I figured out when my college basketball career was over that the NBA had no interest in me playing for them, I thought, well, maybe I can broadcast an NBA game eventually. And so I got into sportscasting and started out, very low level, doing high school games in little towns around North Dakota and Minnesota, and began working my way up. My first big break was in 2002, the fall of 2002. I got a job. I'd been at Illinois State, so I was doing Division I college football and basketball, and I got the job at Syracuse University. And I walked on campus the exact same time a guy named Carmelo Anthony did. And 6 months later, there you go, I got a Nugget shirt. 6 months later, I'm calling a national championship down in New Orleans. Remember, Syracuse beat Kansas at that point in time. Well, that got my name and voice all over the place. I was all over ESPN and CBS and those entities with college basketball. And so I got a call out of the blue from the Denver Broncos would have been the 2003 football season. Said, hey, we need some pinch hitting on 3 games. Can you do them? And they had heard me and thought maybe this guy, would come out here and do it. And so I said, yeah, I could do 2 of the 3. And so I did a game in Houston and a game at that time in Champaign. The Bears were playing in Champaign when they redid their stadium. And I did a game with the Bears and got a call shortly thereafter from KOA Radio, of course, big station in Denver. And they said, hey, You did a great job for us and for the Broncos. Would you ever be interested in moving to Denver? And I said, certainly I would. And the next spring, as the good Lord would have it, I was doing some games at the Pepsi Center as Syracuse came through Denver in the NCAA tournament. And they called me up and said, can we meet? And so we met. We talked about it. They said, we'd like you to be the sports director at KOA and do the Buffs. And that was in the summer or spring of 2004. And I got here. Gary Barnett was the head coach. And 2 years later, they fired him. And now his career is going in a terrible, terrible direction. Next to me in the booth. But 21 seasons later, here we are. So that's how it all worked out.
As it pertains to that, we really wanted to ask you about Larry Zimmer as well, because I am sure that he was a huge influence in your career. And as someone that grew up listening to Buffs games and watching Buffs games with 2 alumni parents, he was a huge part of my life as well. Is there anything that you can say that Buffs Nation would love to hear about Larry Zimmer?
Well, I'll tell you, this will give you an illustration of what kind of man that Larry was. You guys listen to him like people listen to me, right? They get to know us through a Buffs football or basketball game or seeing us, do a show or a speaking event somewhere. Let me tell you about Larry Zimmer, the man. So here I am talking with the entities about moving to Denver from Syracuse to become the new play-by-play announcer. And I knew Larry by reputation. We had never crossed paths. I'd worked in the Big East and out in the eastern part of the country at that point in time. And I knew him by reputation, but we never talked. And so I ultimately accept the job. We signed the contract. At that time, the Toronto Blue Jays had a AAA team in Syracuse, the Sky Chiefs, and I was doing baseball for them as well. And we happened to be in a rain delay. It was the day after I agreed to everything, and everything had been finalized. I was going to move to Colorado. And we happened to be in a rain delay, and I looked down at my cell phone, and it's a 303 number calling, and I just assumed it was somebody at the radio station or the university. And I pick it up, and it was Zim. And he said, Mark, it's Larry Zimmer. And I said, well, Larry, it's wonderful to talk to you. We've never met, but I can't wait to work with you. And so we're exchanging pleasantries. And we go probably 4 or 5 minutes into the conversation. And finally, I said, there was something he said that seemed a little bit off to me. And I said, well, Larry, when did you find out that they were going to bring me in? Because what this meant, and Buffs fans remember this meant Larry was going to move over to the number 2 seat, to the analyst seat in our broadcast. And there was kind of a pause, and Larry said, I found out about an hour ago. and guys, wow. I was mortified. And I said, Larry, I am so sorry. I assumed that you were part of this whole process. And I thought about calling him a time or two and just to kind of get some background. And for whatever reason, it never quite worked out. And so I apologized, and I said, I'm so sorry. And then Zim said to me, he said, Mark, I want you to know something. This will never be an issue between you and me. It had nothing to do with you. It had to do with the folks who are making a decision here in the Mile High City. And he said, so you and I are starting out at ground zero, and I look forward to working with you, which I thought was unbelievably gracious. Now here's kind of the second half of that story. I get to town, and for 2004, you guys may remember this, it was very common when we played the Rams down in Denver to have a little pep rally and a little luncheon down at this convention center area down there every year. And so that was my first real CU event I'd been at. So I go to the pep rally, and we get to the luncheon, and they introduce me. And I can't remember who was emceeing, but they introduced as the new voice of the Buffaloes, Mark Johnson. As I'm walking up on stage, something felt really off and inappropriate about that. And I got up on the stage, and I said, something along the lines of, thank you for the warm reception. I said, would you guys do me a favor? I said, the voice of the Buffaloes is sitting right down there. That man has a legendary career that he has lived here and had in the Mile High City and Boulder doing the Broncos and the Buffaloes. And I said, as long as he's doing the broadcast with me, that's the voice of the Buffaloes. I'm the play-by-play guy right now. I said, can we? And so, if guys, for 12 years that Larry and I worked together, when we'd open up a broadcast, right, I'd open up exactly the same way. We'd come to you from Folsom Field, the most majestic setting in college football. The Buffaloes are taking on, whomever, Kansas State, along with legendary voice of the Buffs, Larry Zimmer. I'm Mark Johnson. And that was my way of respecting him, showing him, I think, that proper gratitude, the way he addressed me and the way that he started our relationship. And so Zim was a phenomenally important, I think, influence on my life for 12 years. He taught me the ropes. Anytime I had a question when I first got here, Larry, what does this mean? Who is that? he'd very quietly say, okay, this person played that role in Colorado history, and here's what you need to know about them. And so he was kind of my guide and then my mentor for a number of years. And even though it's been a few months, in fact, just the other day I was scrolling through some photos in my phone looking for something, and about 2 months before he died was the last time that I took a picture with Zimmer. It was in his house, and I got to be honest with you, I teared up a little bit. So I miss him dearly.
Yeah, no, we all miss him. He was an absolute Colorado legend. That was a beautiful story. Thanks, Mark.
You bet.
Yeah. So, Mark, I want to touch on what you mentioned earlier in your origin story. You said, I thought I was going to be a pastor or sportscaster.
Yeah.
Obviously, faith is a big part of your life, and you share your faith in Twitter. Just wanted to ask you, how has your faith played a part in your career, in your life?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, guys, and you're right, it has. And there are plenty of Buffs fans who will stumble upon me speaking at a church someplace or at a men's group or a convention, those conferences, those kind of things. So it's a huge part of my life. And I'll tell you how it's impacted me in a very real way. I've got 3 children. I've got a 33-year-old son. I've got a 30-year-old daughter, and I have a 27-year-old son. And if you've ever been around, especially a basketball game, they're easy to pick out. Where the team comes out of the tunnel, if you're staring at that tunnel to the left-hand side, most nights at the event center, you're going to see my wife and my son sitting there. My son, Jacob, is 27 years old. He's multiply disabled. Just so I can help them understand, he's toddler-like in many respects. If you've ever seen the movie Rain Man, he's got very rote communication. And so Jake is our forever child. And, here we are. I was 28, 29 years old when Jake was born. So I'm a relatively young man. I've got 3 kids. I'm young in my broadcast career, trying to figure out how the world works. I lost my father to suicide in college, and so I had nobody that I could kind of go back to and talk to and ask questions about, what it means to be a man or a married man or a father, all those kind of things. And so my faith was enormously important to go through those things in life, those unbelievably impactful moments, losing a father to suicide, having a disabled child, which changes everything in your life. And I don't understand how anybody can go through that kind of stuff without having faith like I do in Jesus Christ. And so it's an enormous part of my life. In that disability world, my wife and I have found over the years that the divorce rate is somewhere upwards of 80 or 90%, because it is such a taxing thing in your life when you've got a child that you have to care for every single day. And my wife and I, in November, coming up here in a few weeks, we've been married 34 years, and our faith has carried us through that. Sometimes I've made a lot of mistakes and made her very angry at different times, but our faith has been strong. And so there's, I think, a real life example how it has really strengthened me in kind of how I walk every day, how I carry myself, certainly how I am as a father and a husband, and certainly with Jake, who is, I tell people all the time, the greatest blessing in my life and the most difficult thing in my life, the exact same thing. But when I come home and have a bad day, however that may turn out, I walk in, Jake doesn't care. He just knows that Dad's come home, and we've got our little routines that we do. And I'm a horrible singer, but I sing to my son, Jacob, and I sing to my granddaughters, and nobody else gets a chance to hear that. But he's someone that centers me in life, and it has changed everything. And my faith is the reason why I'm able to do all of that.
Man, you're so inspiring to us, Mark. Like, just the story about Larry, the story about your background, it's amazing. And we've heard very similar things from Deion Sanders himself, Coach Prime, about his background, how he found his faith. And going to that, I believe, after an incident that happened sometime in the 90s. Have you had the opportunity to connect with Coach Prime on this? And because it seems like you guys might be on the same page on this type of thing.
Well, we've had some conversations. The thing you learn about Prime, and I tell people this all the time when I do shows around the country, my relationship and my role with Prime is very different than it was with Gary Barnett or Mike McIntyre or Carl Durrell or anybody. And the reason being, guys, is because, Prime is he's a brand. He's an icon, right? I mean, he's got 10,000 balls in the air all the time. I told him one time, I said, Coach, I don't know how you do this. I mean, you're on all the time. The social media aspect, there's always cameras and microphones. He's always got something going on. And so when you're around Coach, I could walk in, for example, to, pick one of the coaches. We've had far too many coaches over the years, quite frankly, but, Dan Hawkins or whomever. I could walk in and sit down and grab 45 minutes with one of the coaches in their office, and we would do that on a regular basis. Well, with Prime, it's, when we do our show, for example, on Thursday, we always do our show. He and his people, and he's got his agent, his marketing people, and his handlers, and his social media people, and assistants, and everybody. They come rolling in, a couple minutes maybe before we take the air, and he sits down, and we always have a great, exchange pleasantries. How you doing? What's going on? Hey, how was the bye week? This kind of thing. And boom, the producer's saying, okay, 30, 10, 5, go, and we're on the air. And we do our deal. We get to talk during the commercial break for about 3 or 4 minutes. But when it's over, then. And I out cue, this is Colorado football from Learfield. His people are like, okay, coach, we got to go. And so he's off to the next interview or the next TV shoot or team meeting or whatever it is. And so, it's one thing it's not a criticism. It's a fact of life because of who he is and what he is. But I wish there was more time, on occasion to sit down. We've had a couple of back and forths. You might have seen when my first trip back to practice after my accident, I think his social media team put it up. He came over and we had a nice little moment. And then when the camera's away, he once again, how you doing? I'm praying for you, kind of thing. He always, by the way, asks about my son. He wants to know about Jake all the time. He met Jake at a speaking event right after he got here. And so he's always like, hey, how's my boy doing? What's going on with Jake? So he always wants to know what's going on with Jake. And so you can see the faith working in him. And so we've had some of those moments, and you sense it. Like, there's a reason you brought this question up, because you can sense it the way he talks, the way he carries himself. And so even though we don't get to spend a lot of time around each other, there is a unifying quality, I think, because we both have similar belief systems.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's not surprising that Dan Hawkins was not quite as busy as Coach Prime is as far as his calendar. So.
Okay, that was low-hanging fruit there, man.
And for the record, we're huge. We came of age during the Dan Hawkins, Cody Hawkins. So I'm a huge Dan Hawkins fan and a huge Cody Hawkins fan. But
you got a Hawkins jersey.
I do have a Hawkins jersey. I might be one of 2 people on earth, and I think the other one's also on this interview. But we are curious. Just kind of a general question. But what did you find is like what it takes to be a good play-by-play announcer, and what was like the learning curve as far as knowing, where do I need to be looking during a football play? I'm sure football and basketball is different. Yeah. And making sure that you're because your job is to kind of make it visual for the people that are listening, while they're driving. And what does that kind of take?
Well, the number one quality you have to be a very fast processing mind. Okay. Somebody once told me the story that Joe Montana, one of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of the game, who's a football savant, tried to do television after his career. But if you ever listen to Joe Montana when he talks, he's a very kind of relaxed, slow-talking guy, kind of has a slow process about him in terms of how he communicates, and it didn't translate to television as a result. Mark Schlereth is a friend of mine, for example. Mark and I have talked about this in the past. Stink's a very quick processing guy. There's a reason he's so good on the air, right? And so that's the number one quality you have, is to be able to process very quickly. I tell young broadcasters, I taught at Syracuse and I taught at CU for a number of years as well, and just stopped teaching here, 3-4 years ago, I guess. And I told my students all the time, you don't have to be the greatest, sports junkie. In fact, my producer, Reed Fisher, there are times during a game I'll hit it. When we do a broadcast, you got a cough switch. It's a mute button, essentially, right? So you can clear your throat on occasion. I'll hit the button and I'll look back at Reed while Gary's talking, and I'll ask him a question of some sort. Hey, when was the last time we did this? And he always gives me this look like, dummy, how do you not know that? And I always tell him, I have you here, right? Because he's a sports junkie savant. He's got every trivia. I mean, he would kick my tail in trivia like you wouldn't believe if you asked him about sports stuff. And so it's not that you have to have the greatest sports knowledge, but you have to understand the game, obviously. Football, for example, is a very simple pattern when you do it. Now, it took me a long time to figure this out, but football is a very simple game to call. It's down and distance. It's 1st and 10 for the 25. The Buffs are moving left to right. Here's the formation. Maybe they got a slot either side, one running back out of a pistol formation. Okay, so now I've kind of given you the idea of how they're set up. Snap to Shador. Drops, scans, throws it right side, caught at the 32-yard line by Travis. He's bumped out of bounds, gain of 7, 2nd down and 3. And then Gary talks. That's as simple as it is. You just repeat that same formula for 3.5 hours, giving the score and time, obviously, in the middle of all that. But it really is as simple as that. It's the down the distance, the description, the play, the tackle, analyst talks, redo that, and that's all you do them for 3.5 hours.
Mark, I just feel like I was listening to the radio on my headset. I was like, wait, there's a game
just
on.
nerded out right there. That was awesome.
Like that, basketball and hockey are very geographical because I've done both. Growing up where I did, North Dakota, we did a lot of hockey back in the day. But it's just court and ice geography. So you've got to know it's the short corner, it's the high the right side, crossing the timeline left to right. You're describing where it is in the court. And then when I did a lot of Rockies baseball over the years, and I've always said baseball is a 3.5 hour broadcast with 8 minutes of action. So you got to just fill a lot of time until something happens. But it really is, guys, just simply about clearly describing, what's happening in the most linear fashion you can, because you can't do a game like a frog on a hot stove, right? Jumping all around. I can't jump around and do all sorts of stuff. I have to do it in a linear fashion. 1st and 10 from the 25. You understand that? Buffs in a shotgun. They've got 3 receivers to the right. I can understand that. Snap the Shador, right? So you do it in a linear fashion so people can, because radio is a passive medium, right? Most of the time when you're listening to radio, you're working in the garage, or you're mowing the lawn, or you're driving down the road. And so you have to make it simple for people to understand. So that's what we try and do anyway.
You try to make it simple, but you have some of those calls that are just historic, like the big calls with Katie Nixon on the flea flicker. I remember that vividly because that was my alarm for a while. I would wake up, get fired up to that.
Awesome.
But so how do you choose the moments to have more excitement, more engagement, and when do you kind of just stick with the linear calls?
Well, the thing about it is, I'm an energy guy to begin with. You guys listen, you know that. And the good Lord blessed me with a pretty strong, big voice, and so I can use that. So one thing I think is important when you broadcast is I try to adjust my level of energy with the crowd. I always do the games with the windows open. Gary, late in the season, Coach Barnett hates that because it's cold. So I'll give you some inside baseball stuff right here. When it gets cold, my engineer Shannon Scott has a little heater he puts under the counter in front of Gary so Gary can stay warm during the game. All right. Next time you see Coach Barnett, give him a hard time about that, because Gary hates that I want the windows open, because I want to feel the crowd. I want to make sure I can feel the energy from the stadium over there. A lot of times we'll keep Gary's windows shut. There's 2 windows up in our booth up there. So what I try and do is just ride the crowd. What's big for them is big for me. I try and mimic the level of energy. So, in a basketball game, if Tristan De Silva has a huge 3 in a big moment, I'm going to rise and kind of catch that. Then the circumstances of the game as well, right? It is a 2-yard run up the middle in the middle of the second quarter with the Buffs on top by 14, a big play. No, you're not going to get terribly excited about that. Now, is a 2-yard run with 30 seconds left in the fourth quarter on a 3rd down and goal from the 2-yard line? That's a big play, right? So circumstances going to kind of dictate that as well. The thing that you bring up the flea flicker to Katie Nixon, the thing you can never prepare for is that moment. When does something big like that happen? The flea flicker to Katie Nixon, the catch by Laviska Chenault at Nebraska. Pick those kind of moments out, right? I know the other day with the big throw that Shador had, somebody was bringing up the Joel Klatt to big play Monte back in 2004, 2005, whenever it was. You never prepare for those moments, and so you've got to be ready for the opportunity, and then try to put them in context when they happen. And that's what we try to do when you're calling a game, anyway.
So I'm curious. You mentioned obviously your booth in Folsom you've been going to for years and years and years, so I'm sure you're quite comfortable there. But we are curious, and we've asked a few other people. You go to a lot of stadiums, and you're an OG, so Big 12 to Pac-12, now back to Big 12. What is, when you think of your favorite stadium outside of Folsom, which is obviously number 1, what's your favorite road trip as far as calling games, maybe in conference, out of conference, and coming back to the Big 12, are you excited about that? Maybe not necessarily as exciting of places to visit per se, but the nostalgia is definitely there.
Well, I'll tell you this, as much as I enjoyed the Pac-12 for some, various reasons, I missed college towns. Going to Los Angeles did not feel like a college town. Going to the Bay Area was never like going to a college town. Going to, even though Washington, the Husky Stadium's a phenomenal place to do a game. It is as gorgeous a setting as there anywhere in the country outside of Folsom Field. But you're going to major cities, and it doesn't feel like a college town. I grew up in the Big Ten country, obviously, bring up north. and then working in the Big 12 prior to moving to the Pac-12. I like going to Manhattan, Kansas. I like going to Ames, Iowa. I like going to college towns. You know, people think I'm nuts. I don't mind going to Lubbock. I mean, they're college towns, and so there's a feel there, right? Even when I was in the Big East, we were still going to Boston a lot. We're going to Miami. You're going to Philadelphia. You know, we're going to all these places that they don't have that warmth, that nostalgic, kind of romantic college town kind of feel. And so I like being in the Big 12 where we go to those kind of places. You know, go to Lawrence, Kansas. I mean, that's a great college town. Go to Stillwater, because when you go to those towns, even going to Lincoln, I mean, you know, I love going to Lincoln. Doing games there is fantastic, because you go to a place where they love the sport and they are number one. You know, we do a game at USC, and I'm not sure if there's 12 million people in the Los Angeles metro area. You know, 11,999,950 of them didn't even realize we were playing that night, and it gets lost out there. I once knew a guy that did games at UCLA, and he said you find out, as big as UCLA basketball was, he said on the priority list, UCLA basketball is about 572 in Los Angeles, right? Well, when you go to these college towns, it's number one. And they love it, and the fans go crazy, and you feel the energy, and you see the signage, and you see the tailgating, and all these different things that make college athletics special. So that's why I like being back in the Big 12, because it feels like college athletics. The Big 10 is that way, the SEC is that way. Now, in terms of the best stadiums, Washington was always great. I mean, they simply, you know, the whole sailgating thing that they do, you know, right there on the water is really cool. Autzen Stadium was always one I loved going back to. In the Big 12, I'm trying to think. Been so long since I've been to all. Well, you know, Nebraska was obviously great. Now they're in the Big 10. Texas was always great, but now they're in the SEC. And college athletics is drunk, isn't it? I mean, it's just nuts when you think about it right now. Stillwater's a fun place to go and do basketball. Gallagher, Iowa is a great place. And the other one is, I'm just totally blanking on the name of it. The basketball stadium at Iowa State is phenomenal.
Hilton Coliseum. Yeah.
Is phenomenal. And so that's what I've always liked in terms of venues. From a football standpoint, the Big 12, though, yeah, I'm going through my head a little bit. I've never been a big fan of Kansas State Stadium, but I love the energy and kind of the way it feels there when we did a game there. And so, you know, there are different reasons. I've done most of the SEC schools. I've had a chance to do when I was doing a lot of national stuff for Westwood One or Sports USA. And then most of the Big 10 schools, you know, when we went to Ohio State a number of years ago, that was really special, you know, doing a game at Ohio Stadium. And so that might be one of my favorites as well that I've done over the years. And then years ago when I went to Georgia, that was another one I really, really enjoyed. There haven't been many that I haven't had a chance to do. I haven't done one in Alabama. No, I'd like to do one in Alabama at some point in time. But, you know, there's just so many of them that just have such a great feel for that reasons we just talked about.
You know, Mark, I went to Penn State for my grad degree, so I was really hoping you'd bring up Happy Valley, but
I
no
haven't
dice
done
on this one.
That's one of the few I haven't done in the Big 10. There's only like two of them I haven't been at, and so that's on my bucket list at some point.
Yeah. So you mentioned a bunch of schools in the Pac-12, and in my Pac-12 travels, there are two schools that did stand out to me as being legitimate college towns, which was Corvallis and Pullman. And watching them get left behind was really tough. Knowing how central that those games are to that community and how small those communities are, especially Pullman. Pullman is really out there, right? It's super far eastern Washington. So I guess my question to you is, as someone who's been living this, especially college athletics, for now a couple decades, has it been painful to watch this realignment and see some of these historical rivalries getting broken and some of these things that we've come to love and appreciate most about college sports compared to like professional athletics just start to disappear?
Yeah, well, without question. And it saddens me on a number of different fronts. And I know that, you know, listen, anytime I start talking about this, I get accused of being get off my lawn guy. I'm just the old guy that, you know, hey, it's new. It's about time that athletes have been paid and on and on and on. I get that side of it. I understand. The issue I've got with that is that in large part, this has been driven by greed and envy. Now, those used to be two of the seven deadly sins. Now they look at it as virtues. And that's problematic, number one. Number two is what we're doing is changing the essence of college athletics. And I think that's dangerous. All right. Where's this all going to go? I mean, you guys might have seen earlier today the whole idea about what are they calling it, Project Rudy, where there's a group out there. It's a bunch of folks that had been involved with Disney. They're from from the investment world. Jack Swarbuck, the former Notre Dame athletic director, is involved, and they're talking about infusing about $9 million in college athletics and taking the top 70 teams. That's where this has always been going. We knew that. Guys, I had a conversation when I was at Illinois State in 1990. Oh, must have been about 1997, I think it was. I was standing on a football field with Todd Berry, who just retired as the president of the American Football Coaches Association. And he said to me, he said, Mark, there's going to come a time in the next 25, 30 years when college athletics, the top 70 or so schools are going to break away and do their own thing and take all their money. It'll be a professional league. And that's always kind of been the back of my mind. And so here we are standing on the precipice of this potentially happening. That's what this whole Project Rudy thing, you can look it up. It's been all on there, out there today. And that's essentially what they're proposing. What we're losing then is what makes college athletics special. Because if this ultimately gets to the point where, let's say with football, these young men are simply become paid athletes. They become basically employees, right? I mean, that's what they are. Well, at some point, one of these young fellas is going to go, you know what, I'm not going to class. Why do I have to go to class? And then they become just like the professional athletes do. Okay, we love the NFL. We love what professional athletics is, but we already have the National Football League, right? We've already got the greatest athletes in the world playing football, and we all enjoy that on Sunday afternoons. Look at this past week in college football, what we saw. I mean, Vanderbilt beating Alabama, and what was it, 6 or 7 of the top 15 teams went down over the weekend. The pageantry, the traditions, Ralphie running or Bevo or UGA, and all these things that make college athletics really unique. And then along with that goes kind of that factor that you recruit a young man, he's 17 years old, he gets to campus, he's 18, he matures, he grows within the program, within the system. Ultimately, you see him, they become great players. And they become legendary figures. Look at the guys we look back on our national championship team, and we just look at them with reverence because of how good they were, right? And what they meant to this program. Now, I sometimes nearly choke on my tongue sometimes during a game when I look down and I make reference to some kid on another team out there, and it's the 4th university he's been at. And I always think to myself, who is that young man ever going to relate to, right? Alfred Williams comes back, or Dion Figures comes back, or name some of these guys that come back, and they've got history here. We love them. They love us. Now, if you play for 4 schools and over the course of 5 years, where do you go? What are you? What program do you belong to? And I think it's changing the essence of this. And we've already seen that when you create a minor league football system, USFL, XFL, whatever it's going to be, the fan out there looks and goes, well, that's I've already got the NFL. Why do I need a minor league NFL? And so I'm just worried that we're changing the essence of what made college athletics special and different from the National Football League. And if it just becomes nothing less than a minor league for the NFL, I don't think that's healthy for college athletics. And I wonder where that's going to go. Now, I'm of the age where I probably don't have to deal with ultimately where this is all going that far down the line. You guys at your age, right? You're going to see where all this is going to go at some point in time. And so it's uncomfortable. And it's not just because it's changed. I just not sure it's being changed for the right reason. And that's what bothers me about it.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel that. And I really just, I'll say it again, with Oregon State and Washington State, for me personally, having visited those places and worked with a lot of people who went to those schools and seen how devastated they were to feel be relegated, not because of performance on the field, right? Yeah. Not that would be okay either, right? But they were relegated purely because they're small towns that are relatively far away from metropolitan centers with relatively small alumni bases. And that's it. That's all it took. And now all of a sudden, yeah, it's tough.
Guys, this a second. What was the Pac-10 had what, 110 years of history or something like that? I mean, over a century of history. As Bill Walton was the Conference of Champions, right? I mean, the history you think of in that league from a football and basketball standpoint, not to mention the non-revenue sports, was phenomenal. And now it's been relegated essentially to a minor league conference. It's the Pac-2 right now. They're they're trying to dress it up to impress the rest of college football, and it's not. It's really not going to. I mean, if you just redress or relabel the Mountain West Conference, it doesn't make it a power conference. And so Washington State and Oregon State are sitting out there trying desperately to prove their relevance at this point in time. And they're kind of a voice crying in the desert right now, the wilderness. And I don't know what's going to happen. That's why this Project Rudy thing is kind of interesting to see if they could get swept up in that and pulled back in, because I think it's tragic for these proud programs that have had Rose Bowl winners and national award winners and been part of national championship conversations, and now all of a sudden they've been kicked out because of the changing world of college athletics.
It's terrible.
To pivot a little bit, Mark, one of the things I distinctly remember, it was probably maybe the Utah game with I think the last game that Carl Durrell was the head coach, or maybe he'd already been fired, and we had the interim coach, and we didn't know what was going to happen next. And I remember listening to the game, driving through the mountains, and you were on the call, and you mentioned, I don't know what's going to happen, and I know that spirits are low, but you have to believe in this team and believe that it's going to improve. And kind of off of that, and I appreciate that, because I think all CU fans were at a really hard spot at that point. And so, obviously this team has not been particularly successful in the last 25-ish years. And we're just curious, for the longtime fans that have been here for a long time and will be here for a long time, how do you kind of keep the spirits high in a season where we're going in and it's not going to be pretty, right? Like, we've had a lot of seasons where we go in and go, man, I really hope we win one game. And so like, how do you, how does that impact the way you call and what impact does that have on the football side in particular?
Guys, you think about when I came here. So 2004, 2001, the Buffs nearly played for a national championship. It had been a proud program go back to about 87, 88 when Mac got this thing turned, 89. You're playing for a national championship. 90, you win a national championship. And through the 2000s, unbelievable. I mean, I'm across the country, but always watching and going, man, the Colorado Buffaloes, are you kidding me? They're as good as anybody in America. And so I come rolling in here in 2004. Gary had great success, just thinking, well, this is what happens. In fact, Zim said to me at one point in time, he said, Mark, because I said, Gary, Zim, what can we expect from the football program here in 04? And he said, Mark, you got to understand, boy, since Coach Mack rolled in here, it's not if we're going to a bowl game, it's what level of bowl game we're going to. That's kind of the way that Buffs fans and anybody of a certain age understands what we're talking about, right? From the late 80s through the early 2000s, that was it. We're going to a bowl game, just what levels it going to be. And so I get here with that expectation. 04, pretty good team, win the Big 12 North. Not a great team, but a solid team. Go to a bowl game. 05, win the Big 12 North, backed into it, but still won the Big 12 North, and go to a bowl game. Gary ends up getting fired. But I just assume, well, they'll hire somebody. We can't continue on with this. Guys, Dan Hawkins comes in, and we went to one bowl game, played Alabama down in Louisiana at the Independence Bowl, and then did not see another bowl game until 2016. And every year, and I don't need to tell you guys this, you're nodding your head, I can see it in agreement, you know how bad it was. Every year, it seemed to be worse than the one before that. And do you know how hard it is when you're broadcasting a game? And there were times we'd open up a ball game, and Buffs would go 3 and out, opposition would go bing, 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 touchdown. We go to commercial break, I'd look at Zim and say, part of this game is over. What are we going to talk about for the next 3 hours? But that's what we had to deal with. And so it's not easy. Listen, the way I try and broadcast the game is this. I've always said my litmus test is I want that trucker that's cruising up and down I-70 or I-25, driving through the mountains, or, and he happens to stumble upon our ball game. I want him when the game is over to say, well, this guy's obviously the Buffs announcer, right? I mean, he gets awful excited when they score a touchdown, right? Touchdown, Colorado. But I think I got a fair assessment of the game. So that's been the way I try to approach a game. Not every call that goes against Colorado is a bad call. Not every call that goes against the opposition is a good call. And I get fans that get mad at me when I say that. And I frequently say in a broadcast, fans see with their hearts and not with their eyes sometimes. So I try to be fair, but I want Colorado to win. And you bring up that game when you're driving through the mountains. I'm talking about where the program was. The other thing, when you've been around for a long time, now I wouldn't have said the same thing in year 1 or 2, But once you've been around as long as I have now, 21 seasons, this is number 21 for me. You know, I kind of understand that I'm talking to the fans, and we're living and dying together on all of this. And so there were times during some of those bad stretches, I almost felt like Dr. Phil, like I had to kind of prop up the fan base a little bit. I mean, try not to make it as bad as it once was, or try to bring them something that could lift their spirits a little bit, because it was bleak, man. It was so hard to call some of those ball games, and I called way too many of them. That's why I'm so glad that Prime's here and we're getting things turned around here for the Buffaloes.
Yeah, these guys always call me out on this, but it feels like every podcast episode, there's always some like really bad memory that I have that keeps getting dug up. And Mark, I tell you what, the one that sticks out first was Fresno State in 2012.
Oh man. You know the one that gets me is he's the one at Toledo. Do you remember that ball game?
That was the 2009. Right after losing to CSU, right? I think.
Yes, we go to Toledo. You know, at least with Fresno, they had a first-round NFL draft pick quarterback, for goodness sakes, right?
And Devontae Adams, right? I think
Devontae, yeah. Forgot about that. We go to Toledo, not a good football team, and I mean, get decimated. Coach Hawkins didn't like something I said in that ball game, and I had to because I was so frustrated at one point. I made shall we say, an editorial comment about what I was seeing in the field. That's the one that always sticks out to me. I thought, I'm not sure it gets any lower, but both of those games were just awful to be called.
Oh, God.
Ball games, guys, because I think to myself, you know, at least you guys can shut the game off and go you can be so angry you shut the game off. I can't do that. I've got to sit and watch the entire thing. And there were times, did you remember that great scene in, was it Major League, when Bob Uecker's doing it and he cusses and the guy says you can't say it? He goes, well, no one's listening. That's a joke in those kind of games in the fourth quarter. We could cuss right now and nobody would even know. I'm positive of it.
Yeah. Actually, another one real quick. I know you guys are about to, freak out at me for bringing up bad memories, but the other one, I remember this game really well because it wasn't broadcast on TV, was the Kansas game that got Dan Hawkins fired.
20-point lead going into the fourth quarter. And we decide that we're all we're going to do is be an air raid offense in the fourth quarter and keep giving it back to them over and over and over again. Do you remember my post-game interview with Coach Hawkins that night?
Well, not vividly.
Well, it led SportsCenter that night. They actually played the entire interview because it lasted something like 34 seconds. Because Hawk, my sideline guy handed him the headphones, the microphone down there. And, okay, when I do a post-game interview, as the voice of the Buffs, I'm not going to get down there and start hammering people, right? And so in a game like that, what you do, you allow the coach to talk about things. So I give the softball coach an incredibly frustrating game. Your thoughts after this one or something. And it went something along the lines of, well, we got beat. I'm like, well, come on, man, help me a little bit here. And so then I said something about, conventional wisdom would be in the fourth quarter with a 4-touchdown lead, you'd run the game more consistently to burn clock. And he said, we did, and slammed the microphone down and walked away. And and I said, Coach, you still there? And so SportsCenter actually, I think, led that night with that interview of 34 seconds or whatever it was. And yeah, and then Hawk was fired, the next day, I guess, once we got back home. But yeah, that was a painful one as well. That was as big a collapse as I've ever seen. In fact, I did a talk show on Sunday night. Former coach Jim, I'm losing his name, former Iowa State coach, had me on his show in Iowa. And he said, Mark, I never like to second guess a coach, but he said, I did the math on this one. If Colorado in the fourth quarter had done nothing more than let the play clock run down and kneel down every single play, they would have won that game. And we ended up losing it. Yeah, that was the low point, I think. Now that I think about it, that might have been the lowest point of the last 20 years since I've been here.
You're welcome for mentioning it, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Now I have all these. You for bringing that kind of stuff up all the time.
Yeah, it's like seared into my memory, right? It's like part of my existence now.
Yeah, Mark. This weekend is actually S3E8's 100th game at Folsom, and he posted a big thread to Twitter of all of his memories. And unfortunately, most of them weren't super happy.
A lot of them were losses.
It's funny when I get asked all the time about And by the way, somebody here a couple of years ago asked me, they said, what's been your winning percentage at Colorado since you've been there? And I thought, oh, good Lord, I don't even want to figure that out. But it was something like 33%.
Oh.
And when we looked at just conference games, I think it was 25%. One of my statisticians did that for me. I said, yeah, thanks for that. I really appreciate it looking back at those things. But when I look back, people ask me, okay, what are your favorite memories there? And, as tough as it was during the hockey era, there were some great memories. I mean, a great game with Georgia. Remember that one? I mean, it was a night game. I think it was a Friday game, if I remember correctly. Phenomenal game. Coming from behind, Kevin Eberhardt with a field goal to beat number 3 Oklahoma. I mean, there were some great moments along the way, but the problem has been it's been so few and far between. And, 2016 was such a mirage for us. We all enjoyed it. But it was so just, with Cepho and Phil and all the guys and Cheeto. And I mean, as good as that team was, it was such a joy to do that season and see Colorado back where it's supposed to be, which is why I'm so excited about, 4-1 and what Prime's doing and what the schedule looks like and what the possibilities are here in 2024.
As someone that has the utmost perspective on that, I want to drill on this real quick. How exciting do you obviously the whole fan base is energized, right? To a unique level starting last year. But how warranted do you feel that excitement is based on how much we've been through, right? How warranted? Because it felt like to us, like it was a release of so much emotion. Like it's finally our time. We're going to come back. And obviously last year was disappointing, we could say, but it was still a big step forward compared to where we were in 2022. And it looks like they're ready to take a huge step forward this year too.
Guys, without question, I've said many times, and maybe you guys have talked about this. Listen, in 2022, Colorado was not only the worst Power 5 team in America, we should have been 0-12, right? That one win over Cal was only because the linebacker made a terrible mistake, and we took advantage of it late, scored a touchdown, and beat the Cal Golden Bears that year. Coach Sanford and I had a conversation the following Monday. He goes, Mark, we never should have won that game. Let me show you. So he showed me. I mean, holy cow, man. Otherwise, we wouldn't have won. Should have been 0-12. So the worst Power 5 team in America at that point in time, and the most irrelevant football team in America. I think we can say that honestly and objectively. Nobody was talking about the Colorado Buffaloes. So what Prime did, coming in here and energizing this whole thing, and yes, it was a 4-8 season. After a 3-0 start, I understand how you get disappointed at that. That's still a 400% increase from the year before. And got people talking about the program. Now here we sit at 4-1, and this team has done something this season that we always talk about teams getting better. When I look at Colorado, Nebraska game aside, this team has gotten better every week. You've seen improvement. You've seen the O-line has played incrementally better. The defense has gotten incrementally better. And so that's why I'm so excited about where it is right now and where it's going. And I think Saturday's game, by the way, with Kansas State is a great test. I think they're a very good football team. I don't know if you look at the Big 12 right now, if you can say there's a great football team, but I think there's 4 or 5 very good football teams. And I think this is a great test on Saturday. And I'm optimistic we can get this ball game here, be 5-1, and then watch out because Colorado's going to be right there, competing for that Big 12 championship this season.
Music to our ears, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Exciting times ahead. Mark, we got to ask you a basketball question for our last question.
Yep.
How did you come up with the between the eyes call? What's the backstory with that?
Basketball, since I played college basketball, that was always kind of my favorite sport growing up. I love the build up to a football game on Saturday because it's such an enormous game. But basketball's always had a special place in my heart. And it was nothing planned. It was something I said. I was doing a high school game, I think, in Minnesota somewhere when I was living in Mankato, Minnesota. And I don't know how if I heard somebody else do it or if I saw it or what. I don't remember, but I just said it one game and I thought, well, that was kind of fun. Maybe I'll do that again. And so most announcers, they come up with things that become signature calls. They generally happen just organically like that. It's not something you plan on. I told young broadcasters, don't ever plan on what you're saying on the air. Let it come. Al Michaels didn't think to himself, I'm going to say, do you believe in miracles, right? I mean, he didn't plan that. It just happened. So when you come up with those kind of things, it's just kind of an organic, natural thing. It's something that somehow I stumbled upon doing a high school game, and it's stuck, and it's got to become a signature at this point in time.
All right. Well, Mark, we really appreciate it. I think we kept you even longer than we originally promised, but it's just some great stories and really good perspective, especially for people who have gone through the suffering years. And you're one of us, for better or for worse. As far as I think you probably deserve some form of award or recognition for some of the football that you've had to see. But regardless, we really appreciate you coming on tonight and sharing your stories with us.
Well, you're very welcome. And just to kind of put a sharp point on that, I was on ESPN before the season began, and the guy said to me, he said, "Hey, with Coach Prime turn this thing around, who are you most happy for?" And I said, honestly, me. I've called way too much. And I want to call some wins, for goodness sakes, for Buff Nation. And so, listen, we're all excited about this. Let's keep cheering on the Buffaloes. Coach Prime's doing some magical things. Let's get a win against Kansas State. And thank you guys for having me on. I'll come on anytime you want.
Absolutely. Go Buffs.
So we'll cut there. We'll keep recording. Mark, we have one more question for you.
Yeah.
We're hoping to do this at the beginning of the episode. Is there any chance you could say this is the voice of the Buffs, Mark Johnson, and you're listening to the Folsom Frenzy podcast?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Do you want me to do it right here, or do you want me to record that and send it to you so it's better quality? How do you want it?
Ooh.
S3E8, you're our sound guy.
No, better quality sounds great. That would be amazing.
Okay. You write out the line that you want. You got my email address or my cell number. Text it to me, and I'll go ahead and record it and send it back to you guys as an MP3. So I got my microphone right back here. It's my studio I'm sitting in right now. So I'll record it here and send it back to you so it's better quality.
Awesome.
That'd be awesome.
That's
We'd love
amazing.
that.
You're the best. Thank you.
No problem. Hey, thanks for having me on, guys.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Really appreciate it, Mark.
You bet. Have fun on Saturday, all right?
Will do.
Go Buffs.
Cheers.